All right, well, welcome to the show floor of Gen Con 2021. We're here at the Flying Frog booth, number 707. If you're at Gen Con, we hope you can stop by and paint a miniature in the paint and take, or play a demo, or check out all the new cool specials and new items that we have in the store. We're here today with the infamous Aaron Lovejoy, studio painter for Flying Frog, and all-around master of painting. And we're gonna actually just take a few minutes to
chat about painting, miniatures, and all that.
Exactly,
good stuff.
exactly. We get a lot of questions. You know, a lot of times we'll do videos where we get in depth, and you'll do like, here's how you do advanced face painting. Here's how you do, textures and leather work, things like that. And people will invariably say, well, that's great, but how do I prime my miniatures? I mean, just like the basics. And so maybe we should start with that. Do you want to give us some hints?
Sure. We've actually had that question here at the show too. So why don't we jump right in? I've got this Colonel Scafford here.
Yeah, we could probably cut to a close-up of him.
Yeah, there we go.
Is.
Let me zoom right in. Oh, look at him. Super awesome. So this is what we call a zenithal prime, and it's pretty simple. I'll zoom back out. Basically, you're priming your model with black primer. This is actually the primer I use at home. It's a Rust-Oleum 2X Painter's Touch. Prime it with black first, all the way around the miniature. And then what you're going to do is you're going to come back in with white primer.
After it's fully dry.
After it's fully dry.
How long do you recommend?
6 to 8 weeks. No, I'm just kidding. Probably, well, depending on how hot it is outside, 15 or 20 minutes. It doesn't have to be fully cured. It just needs to be dry to the touch. So a lot of times when I prime my miniatures, I start with them face down, prime one side, turn them over, prime the other side, and then once that's dry, prime them from the top. And this makes sure that there's primer on all sides of the miniature.
But when you're saying that, you mean like for the black?
For the black,
just
the black, yeah.
Once you're doing the white for the zenithal,
that
has to be angled.
Right. So you're going to come in from a 45-degree angle up above, and you're going to go all the way around the miniature. So either put them on a cardboard box or put a glove on. Obviously, you don't want to spray paint your hand. And just spray all the way around. And what I do is it's like a light dusting. And now that we've got this wide shot here, we're going to actually spray some of this. No, I'm just kidding.
Don't spray it. I know we've got masks on.
You're going to be like right here, about 12 inches away from your model, and you're going to spray all the way around it. But keep your spray at about 45 degree angle. And what this does is it starts giving you all the shadows and the highlight areas basically of your model, and it gives you
it's kind of baked in from the very beginning.
Yes. And that, when I first started painting, I used to always have the problem of like, where do my highlights and shadows go? How is this model supposed to look? And when I started doing zenithal primes, it made it a lot easier to visualize what was happening on the model. So it's a very simple thing. Pretty much anyone can do it. Obviously, if you have an airbrush, you can get a lot more controlled with your zenithal prime.
Right.
That's what I use. But sometimes I don't have my airbrush with me, so I just grab a rattle can and boom.
Well, and it's also important, a lot of people will talk to us about, what kind of paint do I need for a primer?
Right.
And, I always tell them, really, it has to be flat.
Right.
That's the most important. You don't want it to be glossy or even semi-gloss. Right. It has to be flat. But really, like the cheapest spray paint that you can get that's flat really works pretty well.
It's one of those things, like I've noticed even when I'm in Georgia now, and actually nothing's changed with my primer.
Yeah.
But when I was in San Diego, in my area of San Diego, the Painter's Touch worked really well. But in North County, up in Escondido and stuff, people were using Krylon. So sometimes you just have to test it out. Luckily, all these primers are super cheap, between $3 and $5 a can.
Right.
Which is much better than like 20.
Yeah.
And so they work just fine. I like the Painter's Touch because it's 2X, which means double the pigment. So it goes on black like very quickly.
Right. Now, a lot of people swear by brush-on primer.
Right.
But one of the problems is, spray paint is designed to stick to anything. That's why it's so difficult when a tagger or somebody spray paints and vandalizes. Right. You can't get rid of it because spray paint is just meant to stick to glass
grips,
and wood and everything.
And
so it sticks like nobody's business, way better than anything you could brush on, and probably much better than anything you could airbrush on.
Yeah, more than likely. Yeah, there's different like acetones and stuff that are inside the primer that eat into your model. That's also why they usually on soft models, it melts them.
Well, we don't have to worry about
that.
Yeah,
we don't have to worry about that for
all
Shadows
of
of
our figures
Brimstone.
are either HIPS plastic or metal for the
resin,
Lost Army
resin
or resin.
Either,
all those will be fine. But you know, sometimes when, especially with resin miniatures, when there's mold release, it can be hard for paint to stick to it before it's primed. So priming it with spray paint is definitely recommended rather than brush on.
Yes, definitely the best. And I actually had one of my private coaching students recommended. What is it? The Sandable Primer from the automotive stores.
Oh, really?
I'm totally blanking right now.
Well, that's all right. I mean, that's probably enough information. Yeah. But yeah, automotive paint that's sandable.
Yeah. And it just grips into your model even better. So like that will help with, you know, if there's
I would think though that you'd have to be really careful because that stuff will probably build up and you'd lose some detail possibly, right?
Yeah, but it usually starts going on very fine. So you have to put on several layers anyways. That's another reason why I like the 2X, because it's like one and done. I just spray and I'm done. The other thing, like on resin miniatures, I usually put them in simple green. I know you guys pre-treat them, but I treat them again. I leave nothing to chance.
It seems like a good plan.
And so, you know, I'll put them in some simple green. I don't thin it or anything. It's straight out of the bottle, so it's in concentrate form.
Right.
And I'll put it in for a few hours, and then I take a toothbrush and I scrub it off real good. Wash that off, and then I take the toothbrush and scrub it off again. Because you never know if there's simple green. If there's still simple green on your model, it's just as bad as having mold release.
Yeah, I can see that.
So,
and it's important to note that he's talking about for the for resin models, but for the plastics, the HIPS plastics, you don't need to wash them.
You really don't care.
You really don't have to worry about any of that stuff. They're fine. You can just prime them right out of the gate.
Yep, super awesome.
So that's great news about primer. If somebody doesn't want to take the time to do the black and white, or they don't have both, it's certainly easy enough to just prime with black, white, or gray on their own. Basically, the Zenithal gives you a baked-in highlight and shadow pass that can come through, and you'll see it in the end results of your model. But if you were to do just one, you probably want to choose it based on what the model is of. If you're going to do something like a dark color, spray priming with black is great. But you don't want to spray prime with black and then paint white over that, or yellow or orange, red, things like that, because they'll end up dingy. So if you're only gonna do one color, it's best to do a white for a prime coat under things that are going to be painted light, and a black for a prime coat that are going to be under things painted primarily darker colors.
And one other thing with primers is that most people don't know is a primer takes 24 hours to cure, all of them. So I'd do my studio models and I'd prime them and then immediately start painting, and I'd have all this rubbed off paint, and it's like, oh man, this primer's not working. Then I found out primer takes 24 hours to fully cure. So if you want the best protection, let it cure for a day. I usually work like a week or two out for my project, so I'll prime them and just let them sit. I know most of us just want to prime and go. But if you have the time, just work a day ahead at least, and you'll have much better results. Your paint will be more durable.
On the whole, I find that when I'm painting, it's really good to actually cycle through the stuff. So I've always got miniatures that have been primed and they're waiting for
they're always
coats.
Waiting for something instead of you waiting for them.
And then I've got a group where it's like, well, these base coats are done and they're waiting for like the next thing. And so you're just cycling through. So you've always got something that you're working on.
Something you're cooking the books, so to speak.
And I know we've talked a lot about primer. This isn't meant to be a video all about primer,
but it's important because it's the first step.
It's true, and a lot of times that undercoat is, it carries through. It makes or breaks the end result, even though it's the first result. So what about weather conditions for priming? That can change completely.
It changes humidity, everything,
temperature, exposure. Like if it's raining, you definitely don't want to prime. Do you have any other hints about that?
Move to San Diego and pay the exorbitant prices and just prime in perfect weather all the time. No, I mean, you know what? If it's hot and humid, it kind of is what it is. You might get a little bit adverse results. I primed some models the other day in my garage, and they were a little bit two-tone when I was done. It was black, but it was like some of it was a little darker, some of it was a little lighter, and I think that was just because it was so stinking humid.
Oh, wow.
So, you know, if it's too humid, if it's too dry is bad.
Right.
You ever get that speckly look on your models?
That is the worst.
Oh, it's the worst.
That
and
is
there's
the
nothing
worst.
you can do about that. You just have to clean it off.
Yeah.
Yeah, bad deal. That's
what a
the
lot of
paint
times
dries before it hits the model.
Yeah.
And then it sticks
And you
to your
get
model.
like chunks. It ends up looking like granular
Yeah.
on the guy. What a lot of people recommend to do is like test, you know, when you're going to do it, you know, test on a piece of paper or cardboard or something and see how it comes out to make sure it's not clumpy or
if
anything.
you have an old model that you don't care about, just spray on that real quick. It'll take 5 minutes to dry,
and then you can see before you spray it right on your
yes,
guys.
because it is devastating. I once had a towel army that I sprayed the whole army, and the next morning I woke up and it was like half of it was fuzzy.
Wow.
And I was like, oh man.
Well, it's a good thing they're towel. They're already so alien, you know. You can explain it away possibly.
Yeah, there was a lot of toothbrushing away that, so.
So now that we've talked about priming, let's move on to just base coating. You know, when you get this nice zenithal, you know, with highlights and shadows, like this guy that we can cut in on and show close up, you know, he's got these great highlights and shadows. But if you put on a base coat and it just gloppily covers over that, it's not going to come through. So my question is about when you're base coating, what kind of consistency do you like? Do you mix the paint with water? Like how do you?
Funny you should ask that. I glop it on.
Do you really?
Yeah.
And yet the shadow and highlight still shine through.
So if let me find a paintbrush here in my group of paintbrushes.
Sure.
So if I was to take a paintbrush and just grab like a big old blob of paint,
right?
Yeah, you got a problem with that.
Okay.
Okay. But let me wipe this off. We don't have any paper towels. Here we go. All right. So what I do is I put the paint on. Move this in a little bit closer. So if I'm grabbing my paint like this orange, I'm putting it on thick, but I'm putting it on in a thin layer.
Okay.
So I'm not just gooping it on. If you notice, when I pull off my palette, I actually pull sideways and I'm pushing paint off my brush back onto the palette. So if I flatten it, I have thick paint in my brush, but there's not very much. So if I just start painting like this, I can get much more coverage, but a thin layer of paint.
Right.
So if I thin it too much, I'll have to put multiple coats on it, and sometimes that takes way too long. So with my base coats, I like doing that. But see, if I put it down here in the shadow area, the shadow still shows through a little bit.
Right.
So it works out pretty well. Now, if you want to thin your paints, I usually, on my wet palette, you can see right here.
Maybe you should take a second and talk about the wet palette.
That would probably be a good idea.
Yeah. I mean, since you're mentioning it.
Yeah. So wet palettes, you can get Masterson's ones. This one's I don't know what it's called, an exemplar wet palette. It's basically a sponge with a piece of, some different companies have different palette papers. You can also use baking paper. That's what I usually use.
It's kind of a parchment paper or something.
It's like a parchment paper.
Yeah.
The key to that, I like baking paper because it doesn't let water through. Like if you look underneath it, there's no paint going down into your sponge. I like that because now I can add whatever water I want from the side of my palette. And if I just need to thin my paint a little bit, that's better than putting it in my paint cup, you know, which sometimes grabs too much water. And now I just, I have too much water in there. So if I'm trying to control my paint concoction here, it's better to just grab a little bit out of the side. I can thin it out to the consistency I want. The wet palette itself, like I said, I don't like it adding water, but what it does is it kind of leaves a humidified layer over my palette. And it keeps this paint's been going all day long. Like we started the show, 8 this morning, 9, 10?
And this would be dry normally. That glop of paint would be dry in 10 minutes.
Yeah. So this is really nice because I can go back. What if I wanted to, talking about color theory, add a little bit of blue to this orange to make a shadow color? Right. Well, I've got my blue right here. I got my yellow, I got my reds, I got all my colors on the palette and they're good to use. Say I do all this and I want to come back and clean something up, I have orange still, it's not dead. So that's really nice having your paints last longer, And we all have tons of Shadows of Brimstone miniatures, so you're going to be painting for a long time.
Right, there you go. So when you talked about the shadow color for the orange there, how much do you do that as a blending, like as you're painting a base coat, where you're like, well, I'm going to blend this and actually put some shadows in as I go? Or how much do you just go, I'm gonna base coat his entire shirt to be orange, and then after I'm gonna go in and paint shadows.
If I want to paint very slowly, I will base coat the whole shirt orange.
Okay.
But if I want to enjoy my life and watch TV at night,
Right.
I do basically this. So I'll start with like maybe my orange. So I'll put this up at the top of the shirt right here. So I know this is my highlight area. Whoops. So I throw my brush. I know that's my highlight area because it's white. And then I can grab some of my shadow color that I mixed and put it immediately underneath into the shadows.
And then you keep the paints wet so that you can kind
Yeah,
of
so
blend it as you
this
go.
is wet blending at its best. So see, I put a shadow on the side of this model and I'm putting orange right in front, right where all that white is. Because I know it's a highlight area, or
Right.
it's at least a mid-tone area.
So besides the zenithal giving you a base coat of, or an underlying light and shadow pass,
Right.
it also gives you indication of where you can paint shadows and where you can paint highlights.
Exactly,
Okay.
and that's important because, I mean, sometimes it's hard to visualize. You know, you're
Right.
like, well, this is a shirt, where exactly would the shadows be? This is pretty much perfectly zenithally lit. You see the top of the hat is white all the way around.
Right.
But let's say I wanted to do some sort of cool movie lighting where I only have the light coming in from here.
Right.
The back of this hat would actually be darker, but
Right.
my zenithal prime would show that. It would be
Right.
a little bit darker in the back.
Right.
And I go, oh, okay, cool.
So you're
Let's-
saying in that situation where you know ahead of time, I want to make this a little more cinematic lighting.
Right.
Then when you zenithal prime it, you do it all black.
But you
and then
only
would
spray
prime
from there.
only from the
yes,
front.
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
At a 45
So
degree
it makes
angle.
it kind of fun. I mean, you know, painting can get boring and monotonous after a while, and if you do stuff like that, it kind of keeps it fresh. Also, it looks cool. But so I just did
You just made it happen.
I just made it happen anyways.
Yeah.
But you know, that's how you can very easily with thicker paints get your base coat in. Now you might have to come back in and re-hit it a little bit because you know
Right.
there's a little bit see-through, especially a color like
And
orange.
you know, that's something that I think that when people first start painting that they don't necessarily get. But it's in progress over the course of painting a miniature.
Right.
It's not like, all right, I am now done with orange. I will move on to this and I'm never going to go back. It's like, no, it's a lot of going back.
And that's where the
retouching.
wet palette really helps because,
Yeah.
oh, I need that orange again. Boom, we're back to the orange.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, you have the gamut of all the colors you've been using.
The other thing that I do when I'm base coating is I treat everything as a shape. So
Right.
his torso would be like a cylinder. So how
Okay.
would a cylinder get lit? It's usually lighter in the middle and
Right.
it gets darker on the sides. So I'll go light in the middle, dark on both sides. Now,
Right.
my zenithal prime kind of told me that too.
Right.
But if it didn't, if you started with gray, just think about that. It's orange in the middle, darker on the sides.
Do you have any kind of philosophy about, are you doing like starting with lighter colors, going to darker colors? Do you start at the top of the model and paint down? Like, how do you choose? Like, you started on this guy's shirt.
That's a good question.
Sure.
Without a super good answer. When I paint a figure, I paint from top. I paint the whole thing at
Right.
once.
Okay.
So I will base coat this whole figure within an hour.
Okay.
That tells me if my colors are right, and it tells
Right.
me if my general shading, because I only do mid-tone shadow basically.
Okay.
So I will paint the whole thing because I want very quickly to know if my color choices were correct.
Right.
With your guys' stuff, it's a little bit easier because you usually give me concept art, so I'm just
Right.
copying that. So
Right.
I might do the shirt to completion and then work on the next thing.
Right.
But I like doing it all at once because then it tells me, one, the colors work, but two, is my lighting correct in each area? And I can do a highlight up here, but then do a highlight maybe as tentacle legs are green. I'll put a highlight in the front here, and I'll put a highlight up on my orange up there.
Right.
I can do it fairly quickly and see, okay, does that look right? You
Right.
know, rather than painting just the hat. You know, I had a friend who he'd always paint the face and only the face, and he'd send me a picture on my phone. And he goes, you know, the contrast doesn't feel right on this. What do you think? And I go, well, paint the rest of the model. And,
Right.
and
How can
let
you
me
tell?
Talk to me again.
Right.
Because all of these colors actually talk to each other.
Right.
And if you've got an orange, so he's got tentacles right here. Let's say we're going to go green.
Right.
But a bluish green, I think, would be better with this orange because blue and orange work
Just
together.
with color theory.
Yes. So
Yeah,
that's
that
like
makes
color
sense.
theory. If I did a very like green, it would probably still work.
Right.
But the bluish green would look way better. You know?
Right. Right.
So having both of those on the model right off the bat, I can tell right away, like, you know what, maybe we should have gone with black tentacles, or something,
Right,
you know?
right.
And that
Well-
saves you a lot of time.
And one of the reasons I asked is because, I often will try to do lighter colors first
Right.
because you know, if you get the black colors, you know, over them, the lighter colors don't cover
it's
it
harder,
as well.
or you have to paint them white again, or whatever.
Yeah, and actually maybe that's something you should talk about. I mean, it's an important step, but you know, you're never gonna get yellow to cover over black.
Right.
So you just have to put some white on.
And it will actually turn green. So
right.
Because there's surprisingly a lot of blue and black.
So what we're saying is, if you make a mistake with a lighter color, you may have to actually put some white over it first.
Right. So
and then paint the lighter color, the yellow or whatever.
Correct. So sometimes you have to do like an underpainting of a lighter color, bring that back up. What I usually do is, if I have really light colors, I'll paint them first.
Right.
Because then I can be kind of messy. It's always nice to be messy. But if I can paint those first and then come in and progressively get darker, or progressively get to, they always say start with the colors that are closest into the body. So like on him, maybe behind his belt, it wouldn't be smart to paint his belt first. You paint his tentacles first. That way you can paint all over the belt. It doesn't matter. And then I come back and paint the belt brown, or brown or black or whatever color the belt will be. That's a much better way to do it than painting the black and then going, oh shoot, I have tentacles up here I have to blend, I have tentacles down here I gotta blend.
Right.
If you want to dry brush and they're green tentacles, obviously you can't dry brush green over leather, you know. So it'd be better to do the tentacles first and work your way up to the leather belt, you know.
So you mentioned dry brushing. Maybe we should talk about that. That's probably the most basic technique.
Right.
It's such a powerful tool to have in your arsenal when you first start painting, especially.
Yes. So a lot of times what I do, actually this model, if we switch back to our handy dandy camera.
Do you want to talk about just what dry brushing is?
So
by definition?
So dry brushing is basically, where did my dry brush go? Oh, here it is. Dry brushing is basically taking a brush, getting paint on it, wiping most of that paint off so you have barely any paint on your brush. So technically it's kind of a dry brush. And then you're going to basically lightly brush on the model all over the place. And what it does is the paint, there's not enough paint to go down in your cracks. It only hits the upper highlights and stuff.
Right.
So this is a very fast, effective way of coming in and highlighting your model.
All the raised areas.
All the raised areas. Now, you can get even better at it. Like I highlighted actually the flat areas up here with dry brushing as well. By just continually, it's called insisting on color. I just kept going back and dry brushing it over and over and over again, multiple coats, and I got the color to build up. It can look a little bit chalky when you're done, but for a quick way to highlight your models, it's great.
Right. So now, when you're dry brushing like that, it's pretty, it's broad strokes. So usually it's with a larger brush, it's with kind of a blunt brush, and you're just crisscross across the model. So this is not a fine detail kind of procedure.
No.
So do you find that it's best to dry brush early in the model and then get to your fine detail
So what
colors?
you might do, like on this model, it's mostly black. I want to do like the black belial, and I want to have, I'm going to end up putting a bunch of flames through them and stuff. So I want it dark, right?
Okay.
So on this guy, I just kept going in over and over again and working those colors up. Now, I would change colors on my palette as I went. So I started with like a blue color over the black because that looks like a good highlight. And then I started adding more of gray, which I actually used this Forbidden Fortress, the Tengu gray is really good. And I just started adding that to the blue. So I didn't clean my brush off. Once you get this brush wet, it doesn't dry brush anymore. It's ruined. So like, my brush is still a little bit wet from earlier when I used it, so I couldn't use this again right away. But I just keep changing the color. So I grab more Tengu gray, put it into the blue, more Tengu gray, and then I keep applying it over and over again. And you can actually get a fairly smooth blend that way.
So do you find that you are using less and less paint each time you're getting like a lighter color, a highlight?
Yeah. So when I first start, it's like I don't unload my brush quite as much. But as I go and I get a little, every highlight gets a little bit smaller, you know, it's kind of like layering.
So a drier brush as you get a brighter color.
Right.
Yeah.
And the other thing I will do is typically, if I'm going to dry brush on a higher end model, I will continually go, maybe this time I dry brush in this direction, and the next time I dry brush in that direction. I keep moving it around because everyone says highlight, go from the highlight down. But if you want to create a texture within your model, and I've got big flat areas here,
Right.
if I go from this way, that way, this way, it starts looking like fabric.
Nice. Actually,
So,
that's great.
and I'm not even worried about, I don't try to do it, it's just part of the process.
Right, right.
You know, so with each lighter color, I go back and I'm, oh, that looks cool. Sometimes I leave a little more paint on my brush and I go really lightly, put these little streaks across
Right.
that I couldn't do by hand.
Yeah.
Like even if I grab my smallest brush here, something like this, I can't make that small of a streak. It's like
Right.
literally one hair from this brush, but 100 of them going across the model making a
Right.
bunch of
It
streaks.
builds up.
Yeah.
So you're sort of building up a texture.
It's almost like happy accidents, but I'm kind of being precise, but not really.
Right. Right.
And it's
right.
kind of nice because you don't have to think about it that much, Like you look and see what's happening, it's like, oh, that looks like a good texture, and you just keep dry brushing it,
Right. 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 Well, we've covered a lot of the basics,
Yeah.
so I think we should probably cut this off. We're going to do a few of these here at the booth, and so we'll do a part 2 soon, and we can put these up and share them with people. Before we end this, we should probably talk about Miniature Monthly. Why don't you tell us about Miniature Monthly?
Miniature Monthly is my Patreon. I'm doing it with Elizabeth and oh my gosh, Matt.
Yeah. It's
I've
day
talked a-
one of Gen
I've talked
Con,
a lot
ladies and
today.
gentlemen.
Yeah. Senior moment there. Elizabeth Beckley and Matt DiPietro, fantastic artists. We all paint completely different from each other, which is brilliant because as you're learning, you're going to find that maybe my technique doesn't work for you, but maybe one of theirs does, or maybe a combination of all 3 people.
Right.
It starts at $5 a month. It's a subscription service, but then we have lots of videos on there. It's like super fun.
And besides the videos, people can actually get like one-on-one.
We do
tutorials,
one-on-one private
right?
coachings. Yeah, we have private coaching spots available from all 3 of us. And then I also do online classes through miniaturemonthly.com. So,
Oh, very cool.
a little bit more in depth, all that good stuff.
What?
We got a flyer. We got a flyer that's actually holding our monitor to the.
Is this? You need this?
So that's what this is. We also have airbrushing classes, all that good stuff. So lots of fun stuff over at Miniature Monthly. If you want to check it out, that'd be great. You're hoping to support 3 artists and their families. So that's pretty cool.
Well, and I should say, it's a little weird to have like a class on the basics, but then talk about like advanced training and
Right.
stuff like that. Really, miniature painting can be really relaxing. It can be really rewarding. It's a lot of fun, and your miniatures can look great. But the important thing to know is don't be afraid just to try it. And it really is for everybody. And no matter what level you're at, you can really enjoy it. You can get great results, and you can always get better and better. And so, I think we should just be really encouraging to get everybody into it.
Yeah.
And then if you're ready for training and like that next step, and you really want your stuff to look stellar, and you want to get some coaching and that kind of thing, it would be fantastic.
I had a guy stop by today, and that's what he said. He goes, I've gotten to this point, I've kind of plateaued, and I don't
Right.
know what to do, and I don't know how to get better. And I was like, well, I recommend getting some, going for help,
Right.
because not even just from me. There's lots of guys, men and women that are doing coaching and stuff, and if it can shave, just learning to airbrush took me 7 years to get comfortable with it. I can get you comfortable with it in a couple of hours.
Yeah.
So 7 years, a couple hours. Which one do you want to do? I mean, there is something about learning it
Right.
yourself, but
Right.
wouldn't it be better to learn the basics and then just take the money and run? Do whatever you want to do.
Well, and I've personally seen the results. There have been a lot of people in our Brimstone community group who have started working with you.
Yeah.
And they've just become phenomenal
Yeah.
in a very short amount of time.
Yeah.
And so it's
It's really encouraging to see, because I know what it feels like to be able to kind of do whatever I want, and that's
Right.
a good feeling, Whereas
Right.
when I first started, it was like, I don't think I can pull this off, but I'll try. But now it's like, I know I can do that, and I want to give that feeling to other people.
that confidence.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. Well, that's great. All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. Once again, we're here on the show floor at Gen Con 2021, booth number 707. So if you're at the con, please stop by, say hi, check out all the different events and specials that we have going for the show, and we'll check in with you again soon for part 2 of painting conversation like this. All right, take it easy, everybody.